Peter was enjoying the most exhilarating walk of his whole life when something caught his attention. The text says he saw the wind. Suddenly he was distracted. Fear took over and he began to sink. Well, it's no different with us, really. Sooner or later, storms come. Life doesn't turn out the way that we planned. We confront unexpected obstacles along the way. And at that moment, just like Peter, we each face a choice: to be defeated by our fear of the wind, or to trust God and keep walking. Well, in today's session, you'll explore why it's important to face our challenges and choose to water walk, even though what we face is frightening. It's no secret that fear is a powerful emotion. It can motivate us to take action and avoid threatening situations, or it can be harmful. It can paralyze us, disrupt our faith in God, destroy our joy, harm our relationships, and damage our confidence. It's also no secret that God has something to say about fear. The Bible records 366 times that God commands us to not be afraid. Let's begin by considering a few questions related to fear, faith, and our walk with God.
Scott, you feeling okay? Wasn't too steep for you? Okay. Well, we've been talking about what does it mean to actually get out of the boat and really trust God. And it would be a nice thing if anytime somebody got out of the boat and started walking on the water, everything went smoothly. It'd be wonderful if anytime you trusted God and did something that made you a little scared or uncomfortable, it went great. But a lot of times, that doesn't happen. There's a great book by Stephen Ambrose called Undaunted Courage. And it's the story of the Lewis and Clark expedition. After they had been traveling for about 2 years and faced fatigue, exhaustion, starvation, they thought when they came to the headwaters of the Missouri that the worst was behind them. And so they settled in camp, and Meriwether Lewis went off over the bluffs to look for what he thought was going to be the beginnings of the Columbia River. They thought they could portage for half a day and go home. Well, he climbed over the bluffs, and there he became the first non-Native American to see the Rocky Mountains. They had no idea that not only were they not done with the trip yet, they still had their biggest obstacle to go over. So what do you do when you've gotten out of the boat, you've gone on this big adventure, you've trusted God, and then you find out your biggest obstacles are before you? This is one of the things that happens to Peter. Peter gets out of the boat, he trusts Jesus, he begins to walk on the water. Then the text says something very interesting. Peter noticed the wind. He realized there's a storm going on all around him, and he got scared. And I want to create kind of a picture of this. So Amy, I'm going to ask if you would to come on up and sit down right over here. Here's what happens to Peter. The Bible says he gets out of the boat, he's walking towards Jesus. For a while, everything's going great. And then he noticed the wind. Okay? So, this is the wind. Okay? So I want you to look at Amy for a moment. Notice how she's teeming with life and excitement. Amy, if you were to stay here for the rest of the session, do you think it'd be a little distracting? Okay, all right. I'm gonna deliver you from the wind. Now, this is what happens to everybody who trusts God. At some point along the line, they say, all right, God, I'm gonna do a difficult thing. I'm gonna step out in faith, and they do. But then they notice what Peter noticed, that it's not all real smooth, that there is a storm going on in this world, that there are obstacles that they're gonna face. This is where things get very interesting. There have been multiple studies done in a field that involves what's called resilience. And researchers have looked at prisoners in the Korean War who went through brainwashing and people that have gone through very traumatic events. Here's what they find. People tend to respond to trauma, to great suffering in one of two ways. A lot of people just get defeated by it. They become kind of paralyzed, and it really destroys them. But there's a subset of people who not only can survive trauma, they actually emerge stronger. Something happens inside their heart and their character, and they actually get tougher. Their faith and their courage grows deeper. And there have been a few primary characteristics that have been identified in resilient people. One of them is, these are people who seek to take control. When something difficult happens to them, they try to take action instead of just seeing themselves as victims. Another one is, these are people that have a real deep commitment to their values. And no matter how high the pain level gets in their lives, they will not betray their values. And a third factor that makes people really resilient is they find meaning in their suffering. Something inside them says, this is not happening for no reason at all. Now, there's a classic example of somebody like this in the Bible, and his name was Joseph. Some of you might remember the story of Joseph if you went to church, if you went to Sunday school class, because he wore a special coat. Anybody remember what that coat was always called? A coat of many colors. And Scott, I noticed that you have a kind of towel of many colors. Mm-hmm. So if you don't mind, I know you're kind of a shy person by nature, but if you don't mind, I think we'd all love it if you would be a stand-in for Joseph so we could consider Joseph's experience.
Oh, yeah.
Come on up. You may remember the story. Joseph's one of 12 brothers, and he has these dreams where his sheaf is higher than anybody else's in the field. That stands for their brothers, and they all bow down to him. And they all are not real nuts about this. There's kind of indications in the story that Joseph, although he was a great guy, initially may have been lacking a little bit in sensitivity towards his brothers. And they get real jealous because his father gave him this wonderful towel that he got from Nordstrom's. So I'm gonna drape this around our Joseph. And he wore this all the time, and it was a reminder how much his dad loved him. And every time his brothers saw it, they were reminded, so they came up with a plan. They decided, initially they thought that they might kill him, and then one of them said, no, we're not gonna do that. So they decided that they would cover his coat with kind of fake Joseph blood. And we have a very expensive prop here, just to, don't move.
No, I won't.
Yeah, okay.
This is fun.
Yep. Okay. So he's covered with blood. Some of it might even have gotten on him, but for the most part, it's just on the coat of many colors. They tell their father that their brother has been killed and he is sold into slavery. Now, Scott, if that were to happen to you, if you were sold into slavery, how do you think you might feel?
I'd feel pretty bad.
Okay.
I feel bad.
I want to talk a little bit about Joseph's response, but because I don't want for Scott to have to sit here covered with blood, I think we ought to release him back to seat. Can we all thank Scott for being Joseph for a while? Anybody know what's the number one most frequently given command in Scripture? The most frequent command is not to be loving, even though love is real central. Most frequent command is not about avoiding immorality of different types. The most often repeated command that God gives in the Bible is, don't be afraid. Now, why does that happen? I'll tell you what I think. I think it's because over and over again in the Bible, God asks somebody to trust Him. God asks somebody to respond in obedience. And the number one barrier that people experience that keeps them from acting in obedience to God is they're afraid. Joseph ends up in the home of a man named Potiphar, and soon he's running an entire business operation. And his life looks like it's going pretty well until Mrs. Potiphar decides that she would like to be sexually involved with Joseph. And he faces another test of his resiliency. It's a very interesting thing. Another thing that very often happens to people when life doesn't turn out the way they planned is they become much more vulnerable to temptation. Because they feel disappointed that things didn't work out the way they wanted them to. So they say to themselves, why not just grab whatever pleasure that I can? Well, one of the tests of a resilient person is they say, I have such a deep commitment to my values that I will not betray them. And that's what Joseph does. You'd think that God would reward him for that, But instead of getting rewarded, instead of his life getting real smooth, things go from bad to worse. And Mrs. Potiphar makes up lies about him to her husband, and Joseph ends up in prison. And this, I think, is the ultimate test of Joseph, because the question here is, will he still have faith? Will he still believe that there's meaning and purpose behind what's happening to him? And I think when a lot of Christians give in to despair, comes in that moment when they feel like, my life hasn't turned out the way that I planned it to, and there's no meaning, there's no purpose behind what it is that I'm suffering. Now, there's a wonderful statement by a man by the name of Dallas Willard. Dallas Willard is a writer and a great thinker about spiritual life issues. And I want you to hear what it is that Dallas says. So Steve, would you read for us these words from Dallas Willard?
I meet many faithful Christians who, in spite of their faith, are deeply disappointed in how their lives have turned out. Sometimes it is simply a matter of how they experience aging, which they take to mean they no longer have a future. But often, due to circumstances or wrongful decisions and actions by others, what they had hoped to accomplish in life, they did not. They painfully puzzle over what they may have done wrong, or whether God has really been with them.
There'll be times when you get real disappointed with how things turn out. And the one belief that will sustain you is God is behind this, and he can use it to bring about good that you don't even know. And he did for Joseph in amazing ways. Years ago, my wife and I were at a camp, and she wanted me to go for a ride on a horse. My wife loves horses, and I'm not a big horse guy. We went on a trail ride, but she said that didn't count because it was too tame. So the next day, these college kids who worked at this camp were going to take the herd of horses out, and she said, you need to ride on one of the horses with these guys out to the pasture and come back. It's about a mile out and back. So I said, all right. And they gave me a horse. You know how generally horses get named for their most prominent characteristic? And I was hoping to get a horse named Valium or something like that. My horse's name was Reverse, because of this odd tendency that when you pulled on his reins, he actually went backwards instead of just stopping. So we all took out early in the morning, took the horses to pasture. That part went fine. We started back in, and then one of the kids decided they wanted to race. So all of their horses, there were 5 of them, all of their horses just took off as fast as they could. Well, Reverse instinctively, inevitably, took off as fast as he could go. And of course, I instinctively pulled on the reins as hard as I could. So Reverse reared up on his back 2 legs, like in the Lone Ranger, and then took off like a bat out of a cannon. And I passed 4 of the 5 kids. I thought I was going to die. I thought, this is how my life is going to end, riding this horse. But I didn't die, and the strangest thing happened. By the time I got back to the camp, I realized this is one of the most exhilarating experiences I have ever had in my life. Anytime you say yes to Christ and get out of the boat, what happened to Peter will happen to you. You'll notice the wind. You will find obstacles. Don't feel betrayed by God when it happens. It is inevitable. But the same Jesus who was strong enough to take care of Peter in the water, the same God who was with Joseph when he was in the depths of prison, that same God will be with you and me. It's worth the ride. It's worth the ride.
You know, it's hard enough to get out of the boat when the wind is calm and the water's smooth. But in real life, that's rarely the case. Sooner or later, the storm strikes. In your marriage, work, ministry, or finances or health. And it's in the act of facing the storm that you discover what lies inside you and decide what lies before you. Storms have a way of teaching what nothing else can. When you see the wind after stepping out in faith, how do you respond? Do you wimp out and run and hide? Or do you become more dependent on God? God longs for us to trust Him, to water walk in faith, and grow to love Him more. He wants to replace our fear with faith, But if He is to work effectively in our lives, we have to face our fears honestly. In the personal journey questions, there's a continuum drawn out with trust on one side and fear on the other. How would you rate your normal response to the storms of life on this trust-fear continuum? In which ways has fear limited your growth in relationship to God? I hope you'll set aside some time now or later at home to be alone with God, to consider His calling on your life and the trust He wants you to exercise.